So that ends the section on like the nature of marriage and the blessings of marriage. And the next section we're going to take up about marriage and sexuality is going to deal a little bit more with some of like the abuses of it and what some of the effects of those are. There's four main parts that we're going to be looking at with this. Not all of them today, certainly. Sex and living together before marriage, divorce, homosexuality, and pornography. Living together before marriage. What are some reasons people might think this is, I meant to animate this so that they wouldn't all be there. But what are some reasons people might think this is a good idea? I'll read out the ones I got here, and then maybe you've heard of some others, but these are the ones I've heard. First of all, it can be a reaction to the prevalence of divorce. I'm going to talk about each of these in depth in a bit. Seems rational to have a try-it-out period. People will say, well, yeah, you got to see if you're compatible. People say that all the time. Convenience, economically or otherwise, or because they recognize the goodness and joys of a marriage and they want it, but they aren't actually ready to commit in marriage. Kind of like there's a very non-sanctified expression. Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? I don't know if you've heard that. It's referring to sex and marriage. That's kind of that one, although a little bit more. So let's look first at this idea. The first one of the ideas that I was talking about about living together before marriage is this idea that it can be a reaction to what's happened with divorce. So let's look at this section here. Angie, you want to read those verses there?
Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true."
Jesus has very powerfully pointed out something to this woman. What is he doing?
He knows everything about her.
He knows everything about her, but what else? That's one important thing, and she'll mention that in a second. I see that you're a prophet, right? But what else? Why does he repeat, "What you have said is true"? You are right in saying, and then what you have said is true. Why does he do that? When she says, "I have no husband," he's like,
Well, yeah, the person that she's with.
yeah, he's pointing out, well, you said it's technically true, but it's not really true. This is the reason for him saying that, repeating that, is to jab her with the law. He is pointing out, you are being intentionally deceitful. Even though what you said is technically true, you're doing that, and you're doing it on purpose, and you know you're doing it on purpose, and you know why you're doing it on purpose. But that also leads us to another question, okay? So, you have had 5 husbands. That's pretty staggering, right? That I've never heard of a person who I don't think even Trump had that many different wives. He had way more than that many mistresses, I'm sure, but I don't think I've ever heard of anybody who had that many different husbands or wives. But what is that? Okay, so you have to think about this. What are the options here? How could she have had 5 husbands? What could have happened to them? What are the options? Well, death is one. I think we could safely write off the possibility that this woman has had 5 different husbands die. Maybe some of them, right? But probably not all 5 of them. And if she has, people are probably saying stuff about her, right? Okay, what's another possibility?
Divorce.
Yeah, the other one's divorce. Now, there are 2 possible reasons that she has been divorced from her husbands in those days. What would they be?
Infidelity.
Yeah, she could have been adulterous. If her husbands were, my understanding is she still wouldn't have been able to divorce them. So I'm not 100% sure because the Samaritan culture is not exactly the same as the Jewish culture. And I'm not an expert on ancient Samaritan cultural practices. But I'm pretty sure from what I know from that time period that women really weren't allowed to divorce their husbands for anything. But husbands were allowed to divorce their wives for like anything at all. And that fact is probably important here because, okay, is it possible that she has committed adultery 5 different times? I guess. But it's probably more likely that she's just been ditched most of those times, right? Okay, whatever the case may be, you can understand, pick any of those scenarios, you can easily understand why she might be a little bit jaded about the idea of marriage. And yet, she's still trying to have it because she's still living with a man, right? She's just not married to him. This is so typical of human thinking, and I think this is a big part of what's going on because you'll hear people say this. They'll be like, we're not going to get married. We don't believe in marriage. And it's like, but you're living with this person and doing all the things with them that married people do. So, like, you kind of do believe in marriage. What you don't believe in is a full and legal and lifelong commitment to each other. And if you could say why, and a lot of times what people will say is, well, like, you know, so many people have gotten divorced, and it's usually personal. It's usually like their parents got divorced, and they have been scarred by that because it is scarring. It is very traumatic for children when their parents get divorced. And so this is kind of a reaction, kind of like what this woman is doing, I think, is a reaction to what has happened, to what has been done to her, or to what she has done, probably mostly what's been done to her, okay? And she's thinking, well, this will protect me from this happening again. Of course it won't. All it does is make it easier for it to happen again. But I think that's what's going on. Now, you can see this with some of these charts. So this is the divorce rate in the United States, going back 1860. This must have come out in like 2017 or something. You see the numbers stop right here. So I've got 3 charts in a row. First, this is just divorce rate per 1,000 people. And you can see, first of all, it is just steadily climbing, like regardless. There's a couple of things where it spikes. One of them, obviously, if the end of World War II is when it comes way back down, then during World War II is one of the times that it spiked, which I suppose makes some sense. People are gone, right? Then the no-fault divorce laws. This is the sexual revolution. Notice it's starting to go. This major upward trajectory starts before the no-fault divorce laws. Those make it easier. Meaning before you had to have a reason to divorce somebody. You couldn't just say nobody committed adultery and we're getting divorced, like in the courts. But people probably found ways around that, right? What's really the issue, this is the result, this extra like jet up is very much a result of the sexual revolution. This whole idea in the 60s and 70s that you should just, have sex with whoever and whatever you want, right? And a rejection of Christian morality. It's a huge part of what's going on during that period, and you see that. But then it's been coming down. Notice though, that's the divorce rate per 1,000. So you might think, well, why is it coming down? Is it getting better? No, it's not getting better. What's happening is that fewer people are getting married. So this is the marriage rate versus the divorce rate. So for a while here, you see divorce is going up, but marriage is also going up. And then here, corresponding to this, the number of people getting married goes way down, and that's when the divorce rate's going down. So what you really need is the percentage, right? The ratio. And the ratio has basically plateaued here. So it shot up, it was slowly climbing, then it shot up, sexual revolution, and then it's plateaued. So fewer people are getting married. The same kind of number of people of those who are married are getting divorced. Now, you could probably, I didn't find a statistic on this, but I'm sure that if you found like the number of people that live together outside of marriage and then split up, that would be undoubtedly even higher. Because it is much easier, right? They haven't really committed to each other. So, of course, they're probably going to split up. I would be surprised if there are very many people who have an arrangement like that who actually stick together for their whole life. I bet you it's very rare. But I didn't find a statistic about that, so couldn't put it on there. So I think this is part of what's going on. You're seeing that this is continuing to rise. They're being affected by it. So there's a lot more divorce. People are being affected by all that divorce. You have a lot of children. You have several generations of children where many of them have had parents who got divorced. And so their views of marriage have been like thrown in the trash. And then in popular media, people blame this on marriage all the time. They're always saying like, oh, marriage doesn't work, blah, 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 because of all this. Which is ridiculous, because it's like, marriage, when marriages end in divorce, it's because people have failed. It's not because the concept of marriage has failed, it's because they haven't done what marriage is supposed to be. Whatever the reason is, and a lot of times it does involve infidelity, but even when it doesn't, it's somebody who's like, well, in order to be happy, I gotta go do this other thing. Which isn't true, but that's a big thing today too. People are always like, you deserve to be happy. You see this in all kinds of shows and movies. They're like, if you aren't happy in your marriage, you should just leave it. Instead of, like working at it. People don't do that kind of thing anymore. I think it's kind of hand in hand with our consumerist culture. Something's broken, well, it's a cheap piece of crap anyway. I'm just going to chuck it and get a new one instead of fixing it because we bought cheap stuff and it's not worth it. A lot of people treat their marriages like that. They didn't buy biblical marriage. They didn't do something enduring and lasting and beautiful and good. They bought a cheap counterfeit. And then they don't know how to fix it. Back to the woman at the well. Michael, verses 19 and 20.
The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship.
Okay, what does the woman appear to be doing in her response to Jesus? This is right after what Jesus said before. What does she appear to be doing? Yeah, she's changing the subject. Right? She's like, oh, you're a theological person. I got a theological question. Quick, let's not talk about my love life. That's what's going on here. Okay, it's really like, let's not talk about my sinful situation, because she knows it. What Jesus said before points out that he knows that she knows that what she is doing is wrong. That's why he's so pointed in the way he does it. So she's trying to kind of escape from that. And it's also important to remember, we'll see this in a second too, that when Jesus says that to her, it's right after she says, sir, give me this living water so that I won't have to come here to draw water. And then Jesus says, go get your husband. So he's doing what she asked for. He's giving her the living water, but that starts with the preaching of the law, which is why he does it that way. All right, so the reason that, what appears to be the reason that this woman is not living with a man outside of marriage, we talked about this already. I think that she thinks that, what's the point of getting married? It's a reaction to sort of this trauma, right? But she does know that it's wrong. Now, what is it that actually hurts about divorce? I mean, there's probably a lot of things, but what is it at the bottom of it? What is it at the essence of it that hurts about divorce? Well, what is marriage? The two shall become one flesh. Would it hurt if I cut you in half? Yeah. Now, when this phrase, we looked at this before, what all does this refer to? The two shall become one flesh. What does it refer to? In what ways do two people in marriage become one?
Their sexual relationship.
First of all, that is a reference to sex. Yep. So it's talking about sex. And there's an important aspect to that. And what it is that people who study, human psychology and emotions and hormones and everything like that, they've known for a long time that when two people have sex, it binds them emotionally and psychologically. And they also know that the fewer sexual partners a person has had, the more it binds them. So there's this sort of, you've probably seen this in like a show or a movie at some point, there's this sort of trope. Maybe there's a couple of high school students or a couple of college students, this shouldn't be happening anyway, but all right, you have these two and they have sex, and for both of them it's the first time. And the girl immediately thinks, what?
They're going to be together.
That this means they're together forever. That is a very common trope in movies and TV shows, and it is probably highly accurate to life. That's what these hormones are telling people. And one thing that we know about the way that God created men and women, one of the particular gifts he gave to women is that they tend to be a little bit more in tune with their feelings. They tend to understand them better. Men tend to think more rationally about things. Now, reason, and I don't mean women are irrational. I mean that men tend to exist more on a rational plane and less on an emotional one, and women tend to exist more on an emotional plane, right? And they have like a better sense of some of those things. So what's happening is like reason should tell you this too. But for like a dumb 17-year-old kid, reason can be fairly easy to ignore. My point is that sometimes in these movies, it'll be like the guy acts like she's a crazy person for thinking that. But she is 1,000% correct. She is picking up what God is putting down. The emotions that are involved, the hormones that are involved, God created to bind these two people together. Sex is your bodies saying, I do. On purpose. That's what God did. So, it's what part of what's so terrible about doing that outside of marriage is that you do it without the actual known, rational, spoken, societal commitment to each other, which obviously sets both people up for a great deal of trouble and heartbreak, which is what's so bad about it. So I'm not suggesting that it is the exact same thing as getting married. Marriage also requires an actual social commitment. It's not like the second two people have sex, boom, they're married. It's that their bodies think they are, because God designed them that way. And when you do this outside of that context, it creates this really like bad situation. And so every time that two people even are together and break up, you get a little bit of it, right? Because the emotions have started to bind. Any of that physical connection, you get a little bit of that binding. Two people who have had sex and then break up, it's a little bit like divorce. And the further along you go with this, the more you act like you're married, the closer you feel psychologically and emotionally like you are. And then when you end it, it's going to feel basically the same way. So if you take two people who commit to each other or claim to, and they're living together as if they're husband and wife for 10 years, and then they break up, that's going to affect them emotionally and psychologically probably exactly like it would if they got divorced. Maybe not financially, because there's not the bills for the lawyers, right? But that's a separate issue. So it's not really helping is my point. All that they're doing is they're trying to like protect themselves, but they're just making it more likely that they're going to get hurt for the same reason. This is why God said, what God has joined together, let not man separate. Notice that implies that man is able to separate it. I heard somebody make a ridiculous argument once that verse means that people who get divorced aren't actually divorced in the eyes of God. That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. That's not what that means. Let not man separate is God's warning. You should not do this. You can. You can do that, but you should not do that. Now, by the way, a side note, in the case of adultery, the reason why God or Jesus says that that's permitted is because the person who's committed adultery has already broken the marriage. They've already torn this apart in that same way. Now, he doesn't say they have to get divorced. They can choose to reconcile that. And by the way, also another key thing to note there is that, like, that's not the same thing as forgiving. If somebody was wronged by their spouse and their spouse cheated on them, as a Christian, you must forgive them. You don't have to reconcile your marriage with them. And it's not the same thing. You can forgive in a Christian sense without like wanting to continue that marriage because the trust has been broken and the promise and covenant of marriage has been broken in that sense. So back to the woman at the well. I see. I was trying to figure out how I wrote this. So my point is, as I just made, not getting married doesn't stop people's hearts from breaking when they're together and then they separate. God made our bodies, emotions, souls to bind together through sex. In essence, when two people have sex, their bodies, emotions, minds, and if they're married. Well, they haven't actually yet made the commitment. We talked about that. So not getting married doesn't actually protect people from anything, which is the first excuse that we were kind of dealing with right there. They're just making it easier. Back to the woman at the well. Mark, you want to read 13 through 15?
Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water."
All right, so you might not think that Jesus here is giving her marriage advice, and he isn't, but at the same time he is. See, she's been trying to satisfy her thirst and her need with people that keep letting her down. This is part of the problem, one of the very common problems with marriage in America today. People are getting married who do not have the true God. They don't have faith or trust in the true God. They don't worship the true God. But no one is without a God. A God is that which you turn to, which you trust in, which you look to for comfort, for hope, for peace, for strength, etc. One of the very common idols of married people is each other. Or their idea of their marriage is something that is going to save them. If you get married or you look to your marriage as like a god, your marriage will fail. Because your spouse is not God. Your spouse cannot give you what God alone can give. This is what this woman needs. Jesus is endeavoring to give it to her. He's going to point out her sin. He's going to give her the forgiveness. He's the water of life. This is the answer to people who have been traumatized by their parents' divorces or by their own divorces or by the troubles that they've had in their relationships or sex lives previously in their past. Jesus' forgiveness, Jesus' comfort, Jesus' word can fix that, which gives faith and then prepares us for actually healthy relationships. This is why one of the reasons that Christ has to be at the center of a marriage. Make Christ the one you worship and not each other, and then you fall into the proper place. Some people will also say it's smart because this way we can find out if it will work. Imagine you were, I use this with my confirmation students. Imagine you were going to go swimming on like New Year's Day, you're going to do that polar bear thing. I don't think I would do that. Maybe if there was a hot tub right there. Like if I could go, boom, I would do it in that scenario. If there's a hot tub right there, so I can go boom into the ice cold water and jump right back out and get in the hot tub, okay, I'm good. But otherwise, I don't see what the point is, okay? But imagine you were going to do that. And you decided, well, first, I'm gonna put my toe in here. I'm going to put my foot in here. I'm going to do this a little at a time to see if it works for me. Does that make you more or less likely to jump in? It makes you less likely to jump in. Like, come on. Like, I'm not saying that no one who does it that way will go in, right? But I do the same thing when I go swimming at Lake Superior or Lake Michigan in the summer. You got to charge in there, baby. You just got to run for it, right? None of this like, we're a little bit at a time. I got to let this part of my body adjust because then you just don't want to. It's not fun. You got to charge in there, okay? And I'm using this as an illustration for commitment. This attitude undermines the possibility of commitment from the start. We got to see if we're compatible. We got to see if we'll work together. That's not the essence of marriage. The essence of love and marriage is a full-on commitment. It's a recognition that there's going to be a lot of things that happen that you don't know about right now. There's going to be a lot of challenges that you don't know about right now. There are going to be ways that you don't exactly jive together because you're two sinful people. So if you take this approach, it undermines that from the start, and it's not going to help. The other thing, too, is, you also hear people saying, people change. Maybe we used to work together, and now we don't because we've both grown apart. That's a stupid excuse as well, because the heart of this, again, is commitment. It's a commitment to work through those things. Yeah, you will change in various ways. But it isn't how well your personalities fit together that is the essence of marriage. It's the commitment that's the essence of marriage. And that commitment and that forgiveness and that love can work through those things. All right, so I think this is where we're gonna end on this slide today as a kind of a preview of what we're gonna get into next time. Continuing some of this. Let marriage be held in honor by all. This is a really important verse from Hebrews. And one of the things that I want to talk about, we looked at it already several weeks ago. I have no idea how many, I don't know who's here from one week to another as we've been going through this study. But I showed a couple of pictures there from some characters and some weddings from Lord of the Rings. And I was talking the other day, I was texting Pastor Rodabat, and he was telling me he had just read Beren and Luthien to his two boys. Beren and Luthien is a chapter in the Silmarillion. So Tolkien wrote Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, and he also wrote his favorite thing was the Silmarillion, which is basically like a history of Middle Earth before that time in like saga form. Like think of like the Icelandic sagas, these sort of like mythical tales of these different people. And Beren and Luthien, by the way, are the ancestors of both Aragorn and Arwen. If you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, and Aragorn and Arwen is a retelling of that, and Aragorn references it all the time. Anyway, so it's this cool story, and there's a lot of, in that story and in Aragorn and Arwen and in others, Tolkien shows this very high view of marriage. He treats it as something very noble, very honorable, very beautiful. And I was talking with Sam about how one of my favorite things about reading Tolkien's stories to children is the way that it builds that view, not only of marriage, but of other qualities as well, of nobility, of loyalty, of faithfulness, of bravery, of these sorts of things. It builds that because Tolkien has a really high and beautiful view of those things, and that's part of what's going on here. There's a lot of ways in which this verse is applicable to everything that we're talking about. We'll get into it more next time. Any questions? And next time we will simply read the lay of Beren and Luthien. Just kidding. We will not. All right, we'll close with the doxology. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I read a quote somewhere.